"Please let me go," tied for shame, but the Lakota warrior untied her and proposed. Birds chirped softly, unaware of the tension that had quietly taken hold in one small corner of the settlement. In a modest hut, a young woman sat on the floor, her hands bound tightly with coarse rope, her knees drawn close to her chest. The ropes bit into her wrists, leaving small red marks that stung whenever she shifted, but the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the weight of humiliation pressing down on her heart. She had never imagined that her life could bring her to such a moment. Never had she thought that the innocence of her days, walking to the river, gathering herbs, helping her mother cook, would end in a scene of public shame and helplessness. Her mind raced with questions she had no answers to. How had this happened? Who would come to help her? Would anyone even care? She glanced around the small hut. The walls were bare, the floor cold, and shadows moved with the slow sway of the sun. Outside, muffled voices could be heard, some of them raised in anger, others in curiosity. She realized then that her ordeal was not just private, it was public. People were watching, waiting, judging, though none of them had walked in her shoes. Fear curled around her chest like a living thing. She wanted to cry, but she held back the tears, knowing that to show them would only make her captors more satisfied, would only feed their sense of power. She swallowed hard and tried to focus on anything other than the rope that held her so tightly. Her mind went to her family, to the small moments of happiness she had known, the laughter of her younger brother, the gentle voice of her mother calling her to breakfast, the warmth of the fire on a cold night. Those memories became a shield, protecting her from despair, if only a little. Suddenly, the door to the hut creaked open and she froze. Footsteps approached, firm, steady, and deliberate. The woman tried to look away, hoping it was just another shadow passing by. But the footsteps stopped right in front of her. She lifted her head slightly and saw him for the first time. A Lakota warrior, tall and strong, his presence commanding yet calm. His eyes were steady, not filled with malice or judgment, but with something else, a quiet understanding. He did not speak immediately, he simply looked at her, taking in the scene with careful eyes. The ropes, the shame, the fear, all of it. And for the first time in hours, she felt something she had not dared to hope for, the possibility of help. The warrior's expression did not betray surprise, nor did it reflect disdain. Instead, there was a weight in his gaze, a deep thoughtfulness that seemed to measure the situation carefully. He noticed the small scars left by the bindings, the way her fingers twitched as if they longed to be free. He saw the slight tremble in her body, the subtle way she held herself upright despite everything. He knew that to act rashly could bring trouble, both for him and for her, yet he also understood the injustice of leaving her in such a state. He had learned, over years of living and fighting, that courage was not only about strength in battle, but also about standing for what was right, even when others would not. As he paused, the woman's eyes met his. There was fear in her gaze, but also something else, a glimmer of hope. Hope, fragile and tentative, but there nonetheless. Her lips parted slightly and she whispered almost to herself, "Please, let me go." The words were small, almost lost in the quiet of the room, but the warrior heard them clearly. He did not speak at once. Instead, he crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to her level, as if to show respect and to make it clear that he was not a threat. His presence was calm, steady, like the slow flow of a river, and she felt a strange sense of relief, a feeling that perhaps she was not entirely alone in the world. Time seemed to stretch. The shadows on the floor grew longer, and the sound of voices outside faded into the background. She could feel the warrior's gaze on her, patient and careful, weighing the risks and the consequences. Every second that passed was heavy with tension, yet it also carried the quiet promise of change. The young woman's chest heaved slightly, and she realized that she had been holding her breath for hours. She let out a small sigh, almost unconsciously, as if releasing some of the fear that had built up inside her. In that moment, the warrior began to move with deliberate care. His hands were strong and sure, but gentle as he approached her bindings. He worked slowly, methodically, taking care not to hurt her, all the while maintaining eye contact. The woman felt the ropes begin to loosen around her wrists, the tightness easing inch by inch. It was almost as if the act of untying her was a silent promise, a message that she could trust him, that he recognized her dignity, even in a moment of shame. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but her voice felt stuck in her throat. Instead, she simply stared, wide-eyed, as the rope finally fell away, leaving her hands free for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Her fingers twitched and flexed, testing their newfound freedom. She lifted her arms slowly, almost in disbelief. It was a small victory, yet it carried the weight of something much greater, the return of her autonomy, the first step in reclaiming herself. She looked up at the warrior, and this time her eyes held something more than fear. They held a spark of trust, fragile but growing. The warrior nodded slightly, acknowledging her gaze, and in that simple motion a silent bond was formed between them, one built on respect and understanding rather than words. Outside the hut, the sounds of the village continued, but they seemed distant, unimportant. The woman felt a shift inside her, a quiet realization that she was no longer entirely at the mercy of circumstance. There was still uncertainty, still the question of what would come next, but for the first time, she felt the possibility of choice. The warrior's presence was a reminder that courage and compassion could exist even in a world that often seemed cruel and unfair. She sat there for a while, her hands flexing and her breath returning to normal. The warrior remained nearby, not imposing, not demanding, simply offering the silent assurance of his protection. She realized that what had begun as fear was slowly being replaced by a sense of hope. She did not know what the future held, nor did she know if the village would accept what had happened. But in that quiet hut, with the morning sun casting its golden light across the floor, she allowed herself to believe that something good could emerge from the darkest of moments. For the first time since the ordeal began, she spoke again, her voice steadier than before. "Thank you," she said, simple words that carried the weight of everything she had endured. The warrior only nodded, a small smile touching his lips, as if to say that words were not necessary. The act itself, the decision to untie her, had spoken louder than anything else could. In that moment, the woman understood that courage was not always about grand gestures. Sometimes it was about small acts of kindness that changed lives forever. And so, as the sun continued to rise and the shadows retreated, a young woman once bound by ropes and shame began to reclaim herself. She could not yet see the full path ahead, but the first step had been taken, and it had been taken with the help of a warrior whose strength was matched only by his compassion. The morning air felt lighter, the village quieter, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she believed that freedom, both physical and emotional, was possible. The morning had shifted into early afternoon, and the sun now shone brightly over the village, illuminating the dust on the paths and the leaves on the trees. Inside the small hut, the woman sat quietly, her hands free but still trembling slightly. The ropes that had bound her had been removed, yet the memory of their tightness lingered in her mind, leaving her feeling raw and exposed. Her body felt lighter, yet her heart still carried the weight of fear and uncertainty. The warrior remained nearby, sitting silently, his gaze steady but gentle, as if he were guarding something precious without forcing it to move. The woman could not help but steal glances at him. He was not like anyone she had known before. His movements were deliberate, calm, and full of purpose. There was a strength in the way he held himself, a quiet authority that did not demand obedience but inspired respect. She wondered what it was that had driven him to come forward, to risk judgment and censure, to untie her despite the presence of others who might not approve. The thought filled her with a strange mixture of awe and gratitude, though she also felt a small twinge of fear. Could someone so strong truly be trusted? The warrior noticed her hesitation. He spoke at last, his voice low and even, carrying a warmth that seemed to soothe the lingering tension in the room. "You are free now," he said simply. "I would not leave you like that. No one should be treated this way." His words were straightforward, yet they carried weight. They were more than reassurance. They were a promise that he recognized her dignity and intended to protect it. The woman nodded, swallowing hard. She wanted to speak, to ask countless questions, but the words felt trapped in her throat. Instead, she focused on her breathing, trying to calm the racing thoughts that refused to settle. She realized that she had been holding herself rigidly, as if bracing for more harm, and now she could feel the tension slowly easing from her shoulders. Each breath was a small victory, a step toward reclaiming her sense of self. Outside the hut, life continued. Villagers went about their daily routines, some casting curious glances toward the small dwelling where the woman had been held. She could hear whispers, faint but persistent, the hum of voices that carried a mixture of speculation and judgment. The presence of the warrior seemed to act as a shield, a barrier between her and the opinions of others. She noticed how he remained calm and composed, unaffected by the attention, and she drew strength from that steadiness. The warrior's thoughts, however, were not so simple. As he sat near her, he weighed the consequences of his actions. He had intervened, yes, but he knew that the village would watch him closely. Tradition and expectation were powerful forces, and stepping outside of them could bring criticism or worse. Yet despite these risks, he felt compelled to act. It was not just about courage or defiance, it was about what was right. He had seen too many injustices ignored, too many people left to suffer when a single action could make a difference. The woman before him was not just bound by ropes, she was bound by fear, by expectation, by circumstance, and he could not turn away. As he contemplated his next steps, he began to observe her more closely. He noticed the resilience in her posture, even in her vulnerability. Her eyes, though wide with lingering fear, held a spark that suggested she would not be easily broken. He saw the careful way she flexed her fingers, the slight tilt of her head as she tried to gauge his intentions. These small details told him that she was strong in ways that were not immediately visible, that she carried an inner strength tempered by hardship, and yet untouched by despair. For her part, the woman was slowly beginning to see him not just as a savior, but as a person with his own burdens and choices. She wondered about his life, what had shaped him, what had taught him courage, what had instilled in him such a clear sense of right and wrong. She realized that, like her, he had faced difficult decisions and had chosen the path of empathy. That thought was both comforting and humbling. It reminded her that human beings were capable of acts of kindness, even in a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving. Hours passed in quiet conversation, though not with many words. The warrior spoke of simple things at first, observations about the village, the weather, the way the river ran near the settlement. He did not push for her to talk, allowing her to find her own voice in her own time. Slowly she began to respond, first in small sentences, then in longer ones, sharing pieces of herself she had kept locked away. She told him about her family, the routines of her life, her dreams and fears. Each word she spoke seemed to lift a weight from her shoulders, and the warrior listened with genuine attention, never interrupting, never dismissing. In these moments, a delicate trust began to form. It was not sudden or dramatic, but subtle and growing. The woman realized that she could speak openly without fear of ridicule, and the warrior understood that his role was not to control or command, but to protect and support. Their bond was not born of grand gestures, but of patience, respect, and the quiet recognition of shared humanity. As the sun moved across the sky, the woman began to feel a shift inside her. She was no longer merely a captive, a victim of circumstance. She was becoming a participant in her own life once again. The warrior's presence reminded her that courage could take many forms, not only the bravery to face physical danger, but also the bravery to trust, to accept help, and to confront fear with dignity. She realized that her fear was slowly being replaced by a cautious hope, a sense that perhaps she could navigate the world with strength rather than simply surviving it. The warrior, too, felt a change within himself. He had acted to free her, yet he found that in doing so, he had also been changed. He was reminded of the power of empathy, of how a single decision could ripple outward, affecting lives in ways that could not be measured. He had chosen to act, not for recognition or reward, but because it was right, and that choice brought with it a quiet satisfaction, a sense of purpose renewed. By late afternoon, the woman began to explore the small hut, testing her freedom. She moved cautiously at first, touching the walls, examining the floor, feeling the textures of her environment with renewed awareness. Each step she took was a small triumph, a reclaiming of space that had been denied to her. The warrior watched silently, offering guidance only when needed, allowing her to experience autonomy without interference. The dynamic between them was evolving into one of mutual respect, a partnership formed in the crucible of shared adversity. As the day waned, they both understood that their connection was deeper than mere circumstance. It was a bond forged through courage, compassion, and understanding, a recognition that human beings could rise above fear and judgment to create something meaningful. The woman felt a sense of gratitude that was difficult to express, and the warrior recognized the quiet strength that had sustained her through captivity. Each had found in the other a reflection of values they both held dear: honor, dignity, and empathy. As night approached, the first stars began to appear in the sky. The woman and the warrior sat together, the quiet hum of the village fading into the distance. They spoke little, yet the silence was not empty. It was full of understanding. The woman realized that she was beginning to trust him, not blindly, but with a careful awareness that he had chosen to stand by her when others would not. And the warrior recognized that his act of freeing her had created a responsibility, not of ownership, but of care and respect. By the time the moon rose high, casting silver light across the hut, the young woman had begun to feel a sense of peace she had not known for many days. Her hands, once bound, were now free, and with that freedom came a sense of possibility. She knew that challenges still lay ahead, but for the first time, she felt empowered to face them. The warrior, sitting nearby, understood that their journey had only just begun, yet he felt a quiet confidence that together, they could navigate the uncertainties to come. In that moment, as the village slept and the world outside moved on, two lives were quietly intertwined. Not through obligation or expectation, but through acts of courage and the recognition of each other's humanity. The young woman, once tied for shame, now felt a spark of hope that could not be extinguished, and the warrior, once a silent observer, had found a purpose renewed through his choice to act. Together they were beginning a journey that neither could have predicted, yet both could feel in their own way was right. The evening air was soft, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. The village had settled into quiet rhythms, the sounds of daily work fading into the distance. Inside the small hut, the young woman sat on the wooden floor, her hands resting on her knees. The ropes that had bound her earlier that day were gone, but the memory of them lingered, a shadow over the relief she now felt. Her heart still beat rapidly, a mixture of lingering fear and cautious curiosity. She had been freed, yet freedom felt strange, almost fragile, as though it could be taken away at any moment. The Lakota warrior remained near her, his presence calm but unwavering. He did not speak much, understanding that words were not always needed. His eyes, steady and observant, followed her movements without being intrusive. He noticed the small details, the way she flexed her fingers, the careful way she shifted her weight, the subtle glance toward the doorway as if checking for danger. Each action told him something about her state of mind, her resilience, and her vulnerability. He could see that she was trying to regain control over a world that had felt overwhelmingly harsh, and he knew that his role was to support her without overstepping. For the young woman, the warrior's presence was both comforting and unsettling. She had been so accustomed to fear and helplessness that his calm confidence felt unfamiliar, almost alien. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, but her voice caught in her throat. Instead, she simply watched him, trying to understand his intentions, trying to measure the trust she could place in him. Slowly, a sense of curiosity began to replace her fear. She wanted to know more about him, not just the warrior who had untied her, but the man who had made a deliberate choice to stand against injustice. The warrior, sensing her hesitation, decided to bridge the gap with quiet conversation. He spoke first, his voice low and even, carrying a natural warmth that made the room feel less heavy. "You do not have to speak if you are not ready," he said. "I understand that much has happened today, and it is not easy to trust so quickly. But I am here to help, not to harm." His words were simple, yet they carried weight. They conveyed respect, patience, and a willingness to allow her to set the pace for the growing trust between them. She listened carefully, absorbing each word. There was something in his tone that reassured her, something that suggested he would not abandon her or betray her confidence. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she began to speak. At first, it was only a few words, broken sentences describing the fear she had felt while bound, the shame she had carried, and the isolation that had made each moment unbearable. The warrior listened, nodding occasionally, never interrupting, allowing her to release the thoughts that had been trapped inside her for so long. As the conversation continued, a fragile connection began to form. The warrior's presence, once intimidating because of his strength and authority, began to feel protective, like a shield against the judgment of the world outside. She realized that she could speak honestly, without fear of ridicule or dismissal. In return, the warrior shared small details about himself, stories of life in the village, of moments of challenge and responsibility, and of his own understanding of courage. Not once did he speak in a way that demanded admiration. Instead, he shared experiences that revealed his values and sense of honor. Time passed, marked only by the shifting light and the subtle sounds of the village at rest. The young woman found herself relaxing slightly, her body no longer tense, her hands resting naturally in her lap. She discovered that she could smile again, quietly at first, then more openly as the hours passed. The warrior, in turn, observed the transformation with a quiet satisfaction, understanding that freedom was more than the absence of ropes. It was the ability to feel safe, to express oneself, and to reclaim dignity. Despite the growing sense of safety, there were moments when fear would return, sudden and sharp. She would glance toward the door or tense at a distant sound, her mind replaying the helplessness of earlier moments. Each time, the warrior would offer a calm presence, sometimes a gentle word, sometimes only a steady look, reminding her that she was no longer alone and that danger, while never completely absent, was not immediate. Slowly, the tension in her body began to ease, replaced by a cautious awareness that she could navigate the world with more confidence than she had believed possible. The warrior also began to notice subtle changes in himself. He had acted out of a sense of duty and justice, but in doing so, he had discovered a deeper connection to another human being. He felt a sense of responsibility, yes, but also something more tender, a desire to ensure that she was not only safe but understood, respected, and seen for who she truly was. He recognized that this connection was fragile and needed careful attention, but he also sensed its potential to grow into something meaningful if nurtured with patience and empathy. Evening turned into night and the hut grew cooler, the shadows lengthening across the wooden floor. The young woman, now more relaxed, began to ask questions about the warrior's life, about his experiences, his village, and the principles that guided him. He answered thoughtfully, sharing not only stories of courage and challenge, but also lessons learned from hardship and reflection. She listened with rapt attention, her curiosity growing as she began to see him not just as a rescuer, but as a person with depth, wisdom, and integrity. In these moments, the barriers between them slowly dissolved. There was no rush, no pressure, only a growing understanding built through patience, conversation, and shared presence. The young woman began to see that strength could take many forms: the physical strength of the warrior, the emotional strength of enduring hardship, and the courage required to trust another human being after betrayal and fear. The warrior, in turn, saw that her resilience was remarkable, that even in her vulnerability she had preserved a core of dignity and intelligence that demanded recognition and respect. At one point she paused and looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. "Why did you help me?" she asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. The warrior considered her question carefully. "Because it was right," he replied simply. "Because I could. And because no one should be made to suffer alone when it can be prevented." His answer was simple, yet it carried a profound truth. It was not about admiration, reward, or expectation. It was about acting with compassion and honor when the opportunity presented itself. The young woman thought about his words long after he had spoken them. She realized that she had never encountered someone who acted with such deliberate kindness, without ulterior motives. Her mind wandered over the events of the day, over the fear, the humiliation, and now this emerging sense of hope. She began to understand that courage and compassion were intertwined, that one often led to the other, and that trust was the bridge between them. Night deepened, and the village fell silent, leaving only the sounds of wind rustling through the trees and the occasional call of a distant animal. In the quiet, the woman felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for many hours. She was still cautious, aware that the future held uncertainty, but she also felt a quiet determination to face it with strength. The warrior remained nearby, a steady presence that did not crowd or dominate, allowing her to feel the freedom of choice even as she adjusted to her new reality. As the stars appeared overhead, the young woman realized that her perspective had begun to shift. The shame she had carried felt less suffocating, replaced by a fragile hope that she could rebuild her life, piece by piece. The warrior had not only freed her from the physical ropes, but had also offered a model of dignity, respect, and courage that inspired her to consider the possibilities beyond fear. For the first time, she began to imagine a life in which she could take steps forward with confidence, guided by her own choices and supported by the presence of someone who valued her humanity. In those quiet hours, a connection deepened, a connection not yet defined by words like love or friendship, but by trust, respect, and shared humanity. Each understood, without needing to speak, that they had encountered something rare, a bond formed in adversity, yet built on integrity and compassion. The young woman felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire or the evening air. It was a warmth that came from being seen, understood, and treated as more than a victim. The warrior, too, felt a shift, recognizing that his act of kindness had created a responsibility and a possibility, an opportunity to continue supporting and respecting her as she regained her autonomy. By the time the moon hung high in the night sky, they sat together in quiet reflection. No words were necessary, the silence itself carried meaning. The young woman understood that her freedom was not just the absence of ropes, but the presence of safety, respect, and choice. The warrior understood that his courage had brought not only liberation, but also the chance for a profound human connection. And in that shared understanding, both began to see that what had started as an act of intervention might evolve into something lasting and transformative. The next morning, The sunlight streamed gently through the small hut, warming the wooden floor and casting soft patterns on the walls. The young woman awoke with a strange mixture of calm and nervousness. The ropes were long gone, yet the events of the previous day remained vivid in her mind. She could still feel the weight of fear that had pressed on her chest, the shame that had made her feel small and powerless. But alongside those lingering feelings was a new and unfamiliar sensation, a sense of safety, of possibility, and even curiosity. The presence of the Lakota warrior beside her, steady and reassuring, had begun to shift her perspective, opening a door she had not dared to approach before. She moved carefully, testing the freedom of her body. Her fingers flexed, her shoulders relaxed, and her chest felt lighter than it had in what seemed like an eternity. The warrior watched quietly, not intruding, letting her explore the space and reacquaint herself with the simple act of moving without restraint. There was no rush, no expectation, only the patient presence of someone who understood the delicate balance between freedom and fear. She noticed the gentle way he observed her, the respect in his gaze, and a small spark of trust flickered inside her heart. As the morning passed, conversation began to flow more naturally between them. The young woman spoke of her life before the incident, her family, her small routines, and the dreams she had held quietly in her heart. She talked about the simple joys she had once taken for granted, like walking along the riverbank, collecting herbs, and listening to the wind rustle through the trees. Each word she shared was a small step toward reclaiming herself, a way to stitch together the pieces of life that had been disrupted by fear and shame. The warrior listened with unwavering attention, occasionally asking gentle questions to encourage her to speak further. He did not dominate the conversation. Instead, he created a space where she could feel safe to express herself. His own stories were shared sparingly but with care, tales of life in the village, moments of challenge and learning, and the principles that guided his actions. He spoke of courage not as the absence of fear, but as the willingness to act rightly despite it. Through these stories, he subtly imparted lessons about strength, respect, and the importance of empathy. As the day unfolded, the woman began to notice small things about the warrior that deepened her curiosity and admiration. She saw the kindness in his gestures, the thoughtfulness in his expressions, and the calm confidence that never felt threatening. She realized that he had acted not out of desire for recognition or reward, but simply because he believed it was right to do so. This understanding touched her deeply, stirring emotions she had not allowed herself to feel for a long time. She found herself watching him with a mixture of awe and gratitude, her heart quietly opening to the idea that people could act with integrity even in a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving. The warrior, for his part, began to notice changes in her as well. The initial fear and tension that had made her appear smaller and withdrawn were slowly giving way to confidence and curiosity. Her posture became more relaxed, her movements more fluid, and her voice stronger as she recounted stories of her life. He saw resilience in her eyes, a spark that had not been dimmed by adversity. Each small smile, each cautious laugh, was a reminder of the strength she carried within her, a strength that had persisted despite the shame and fear that had once bound her. By mid-afternoon, a sense of ease had settled over the hut. They had shared stories, laughter, and moments of quiet reflection. The young woman began to feel a bond forming, subtle but undeniable. It was not yet love, not in the romantic sense, but a connection born of shared experience, mutual respect, and the recognition of each other's humanity. She realized that she trusted him not blindly, but carefully, appreciating his presence and the choices he had made to act honorably. The warrior, too, felt the bond growing stronger. He had acted to free her, but now he saw that their relationship could be more than the sum of that single act. He felt a responsibility to protect and guide, yes, but also a sense of admiration for the resilience and dignity she displayed. He recognized that this connection required patience and understanding, that it could not be rushed or forced. Yet he also sensed its potential to deepen, to become something meaningful and lasting if nurtured with care. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the hut, the atmosphere shifted subtly. The young woman found herself opening up about deeper fears and hopes, things she had not shared with anyone before. She spoke of the shame that had weighed on her, the moments of despair when she had felt utterly alone, and the small sparks of courage that had kept her moving forward. Each confession was met with gentle attention and quiet acknowledgement from the warrior, reinforcing the trust that had begun to grow between them. There were moments of silence as well, comfortable and reflective. Neither felt the need to fill the quiet with words. The presence of the other was enough. In those moments, the young woman felt a sense of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in what felt like forever. And the warrior, observing her with care, felt a profound respect and admiration for her resilience, her courage, and the way she faced the world despite the hardships she had endured. As evening approached, the warrior made a small, deliberate gesture. He offered her a cup of water, not with condescension or pity, but as a simple act of care. She accepted it with a tentative smile, realizing that this small kindness carried more meaning than any words could convey. It was a reminder that freedom was not just the absence of physical restraint, but also the presence of support, respect, and thoughtful action. The young woman's thoughts began to drift to the future. She did not know what it held, nor could she predict the challenges she might face. But for the first time, she felt a quiet hope that things could improve, that life could be more than survival and fear. The warrior's presence was a reminder that there were people willing to act with integrity and compassion, that courage could manifest in unexpected ways, and that even in moments of despair, connection and understanding were possible. Night fell, and the hut was bathed in the gentle glow of moonlight. The young woman and the warrior sat together, the day's events settling into a rhythm of quiet reflection. She felt a sense of gratitude that was difficult to express, not only for her physical freedom but also for the trust, respect, and patience he had shown. He had given her more than safety. He had offered the possibility of hope, of rebuilding her life with dignity intact. In the quiet of the night, an unspoken understanding passed between them. They both recognized that their bond had grown stronger, shaped not by circumstance alone, but by deliberate acts of empathy, courage, and respect. The young woman realized that she was beginning to feel something she had not allowed herself to feel before: the possibility of a future that included companionship, trust, and even the potential for love. The warrior, too, felt a growing sense of connection, a recognition that the choices he had made had led to something profound and transformative. As the stars appeared overhead, glittering in the vast sky, the young woman allowed herself to feel a sense of peace she had not known in many hours. She was free, not just from the ropes that had bound her, but from the weight of despair that had accompanied them. She had regained a measure of control over her life, supported by someone who understood the delicate balance between strength and compassion. And in that quiet moment, the seeds of something new and beautiful had been planted, a bond that could grow into mutual respect, trust, and perhaps even love. By the time the moon reached its highest point, the young woman and the warrior had shared laughter, stories, quiet reflection, and a growing awareness of each other's humanity. They had begun to bridge the gap created by fear, shame, and circumstance, replacing it with understanding, care, and hope. And while neither could predict the future, both could feel that something meaningful had begun, a connection that would continue to deepen as they navigated the days to come. The night ended with a sense of quiet anticipation. The young woman felt lighter, her spirit buoyed by the realization that she was not alone. The warrior remained by her side, a steadfast presence, offering not only protection but also respect, patience, and the promise of continued support. And in the soft glow of the moonlight, both understood that their story, though still unfolding, had entered a new chapter, one filled with potential, trust, and the first stirrings of deeper connection. The morning sun rose slowly over the village, filling the small hut with soft, golden light. The young woman stirred awake, feeling a quiet sense of anticipation that she could not fully explain. The events of the previous days had left a deep impression on her, reshaping her understanding of courage, trust, and human connection. She stretched her arms and flexed her fingers, remembering how recently they had been bound and helpless. That memory, once heavy and suffocating, now felt like a distant shadow, replaced by a cautious hope and a newfound confidence in her own resilience. The warrior sat nearby, his posture relaxed yet attentive. He had spent the night in quiet reflection, thinking about the bond that had grown between them and the path that lay ahead. He understood that the next steps required care and thoughtfulness, as their connection had deepened into something meaningful. It was no longer just about freedom or safety. It was about trust, mutual respect, and the possibility of shared lives. His gaze met hers, steady and warm, and she felt a comforting reassurance in that look. As the day began, they shared breakfast in silence at first, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Yet the silence was not uncomfortable. It was filled with understanding, as if words were unnecessary to convey the depth of their feelings. The young woman felt a growing sense of gratitude for the warrior, not only for freeing her from her physical restraints, but also for helping her reclaim her dignity and confidence. She realized that his presence had become a source of strength, a quiet anchor in a world that had once seemed uncertain and frightening. After breakfast, they stepped outside to feel the morning air. The village was slowly coming to life, the hum of daily routine surrounding them. Children ran along the paths, animals stirred, and the smell of fresh earth and wood filled the air. Walking together, the young woman felt a strange sense of freedom she had not experienced in a long time. Each step was a reminder of the choice she now had, the power to move forward, to shape her own path, and to embrace the possibilities before her. The warrior matched her pace, walking beside her rather than ahead or behind, showing that their relationship had become one of equals, built on respect and shared experience. As they wandered near the edge of the village, the warrior spoke quietly. "These days have been difficult for you," he said, "yet you have shown strength that is remarkable. Many would have given in to despair, but you have endured." His words were sincere, without praise for its own sake. They acknowledged her courage and resilience, and she felt a warmth in her chest that she had not known for many days. It was a recognition that she was not defined by the fear or shame of the past, but by her ability to face it and move forward. The young woman paused, taking in the warrior's words. She felt a mixture of humility and gratitude. "I never thought I could feel safe again," she admitted softly. "Not after everything I went through, but you have shown me that courage and kindness still exist. That someone can act with honor even when others do not." Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes were steady, reflecting the depth of her feelings. The warrior listened without interruption, understanding that these words were more than gratitude. They were a confession of trust, a bridge being built between two hearts. They continued to walk in silence for a while, the air filled with the soft rustle of leaves and the distant sounds of the village. Each step deepened their understanding of each other. The warrior noticed the subtle ways she had grown stronger, her posture more upright, her gaze more confident, her movements more assured. He saw not just the survivor of recent events, but a woman of resilience, dignity, and intelligence. And in that realization, he felt a quiet admiration and a growing desire to protect and honor her, not just as someone he had helped, but as someone he deeply respected and cared for. As the sun climbed higher, They found a quiet spot near a small stream that flowed along the edge of the village. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and the gentle sound of its flow created a peaceful atmosphere. The young woman sat on a large stone, gazing at the water, feeling a sense of calm she had not known in a long time. The warrior stood nearby, then slowly approached, his steps careful, respectful, and deliberate. She looked up at him, noticing a seriousness in his eyes that made her heart skip a beat. He knelt in front of her, not as a gesture of superiority, but as a sign of respect and sincerity. "These days have shown me your strength, your courage, and your heart," he said quietly. "I have seen you endure fear and hardship, and I have seen you rise above it. I would be honored if you allowed me to walk beside you, not just as a protector but as a partner in life. Will you allow me to be your husband?" The question hung in the air, both powerful and gentle. The young woman's heart raced. She had never expected such a proposal, especially under these circumstances. Yet as she looked into the warrior's eyes, she saw truth, respect, and unwavering honor. She realized that this proposal was not about control or ownership. It was about partnership, mutual respect, and a shared journey forward. Her mind raced with thoughts of the past, of fear and shame, and then slowly the possibilities of the future began to unfold before her. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of hope and gratitude. She had endured so much, yet here was someone offering her not only love but dignity, trust, and equality. After a long pause, she nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will." Her words were simple, yet they carried the weight of all she had experienced, all she had survived, and all she now hoped to embrace. The warrior smiled, a gentle, heartfelt smile that reflected his own relief and happiness. He extended his hand and she took it, feeling the strength and warmth of his grip. In that moment, a bond was sealed, not just by words or ceremony, but by mutual respect, shared experience, and a promise of trust. Around them, the world continued in quiet rhythm, but for them, time seemed to stand still, holding the significance of that moment in a delicate balance. The rest of the day was spent in a mixture of quiet celebration and reflective conversation. They spoke of the future, of dreams and plans, and of how they would navigate life together. The young woman shared her hopes for learning, for contributing to the village, and for building a home filled with respect and compassion. The warrior spoke of his own vision for shared responsibility, of honor, and of walking together through whatever challenges might arise. Each word and gesture reinforced the depth of their commitment, and each smile and glance deepened the connection that had grown over the past days. By evening, the village had begun to notice the change in them. Whispers floated through the air, some curious, some surprised, yet the young woman and the warrior paid little attention. They had found something far more important: the understanding that courage, trust, and love could exist even in the aftermath of fear and hardship. They had learned that acts of kindness and bravery could transform lives, and that a bond formed in respect and empathy could overcome shame and uncertainty. As night fell, they returned to the small hut, hand in hand. The stars shone brightly above, reflecting in the warrior's eyes as he looked at her. The young woman felt a sense of peace and hope unlike anything she had known before. She realized that her life had been changed forever, not by the events that had brought fear and shame, but by the choices made by someone who had acted with honor and compassion. Together they had discovered the power of trust, the strength of resilience, and the beauty of a bond built on mutual respect. In the quiet of the night, as the village slept and the world seemed still, they sat together, hands entwined, hearts connected, and minds at ease. The young woman, once bound for shame, now felt a sense of freedom, hope, and love that filled her spirit. The warrior, who had chosen to act with courage and empathy, now felt the reward of a deep and meaningful connection. Together they had created a beginning, a life filled with promise, trust, and the potential for enduring happiness. And in that moment, beneath the stars and bathed in the soft glow of moonlight, both understood that courage, respect, and love had the power to transform even the darkest moments into a future of hope. Their journey was just beginning, but it had already shown them the strength of the human spirit, the importance of compassion, and the extraordinary possibilities that arise when trust and dignity are restored.